A woman entered the room with the confidence of someone who believes they understand the world just by observing the surface. Her steps were firm, her gaze calculated, accustomed to measuring people before even hearing their voices. To her, that place wasn't just a casual meeting, but a space where value and importance needed to be perceived quickly. As she moved through the hall, her eyes analyzed clothes, gestures, and postures. Well-dressed people received attention. Confident laughter sparked interest. Everything followed the logic she had always known. Those who appear to be more are worth more. That's when she noticed him. Sitting discreetly away from the center was a simple-looking man. Common clothes, a serene expression, hands resting peacefully. He didn't speak loudly, didn't try to join any conversation, didn't display signs of status. He just observed. For that woman, that was enough. Without exchanging a word, she concluded that the man had no relevance. In her mind, he occupied the place reserved for those who don't influence decisions, don't change destinies, and don't matter. She passed him without greeting him, not out of politeness, not out of curiosity. She simply ignored him, as if his presence didn't deserve to be noted. What she didn't know, and didn't care to know, is that some men learn early on that they don't need to announce who they are. They learn that true weight is not revealed in grand gestures, but in silence. While she continued distributing strategic smiles, the simple man remained there, invisible only to those who look in a hurry. And in that instant, without realizing it, that woman had already made a mistake she couldn't undo. She had always believed the world was a game of well-defined positions. At the top, those who speak the loudest. At the bottom, those who accept being forgotten. And between these extremes, only appearances competing for attention. She approached a lively group where laughter was exaggerated and stories sounded larger than they really were. There, she felt comfortable. It was the environment where she knew exactly how to act, how to speak, how to seem important. From time to time, her eyes returned to the back of the hall. The simple man remained in the same place, quiet, contained, making no effort to be noticed. That bothered her. In her logic, those who have something to offer try to show it. Those who remain in silence accept their own irrelevance. And that man seemed too comfortable for someone who, according to her judgment, had no value. She whispered to someone nearby, pointing discreetly. Some people clearly don't belong in certain places. The comment drew a knowing smile. To her, that confirmed her perception. The simple man noticed the stares but didn't react. He didn't look away, didn't change his posture. He had been judged before, many times, and he learned that responding to this kind of judgment is usually useless. While she asserted herself through the approval of others, he carried the peace of someone who doesn't need to convince anyone. She didn't know, but in that silence there was history. There were difficult decisions, deep falls, and choices made when no one was looking. But to that woman, all of it was invisible. And so, once again, she chose to ignore what she couldn't understand. That woman didn't notice when the atmosphere began to change. Conversations, once scattered, became more contained. Some glances began to turn toward the same point as if something was about to happen. She continued involved in her own narrative, talking about achievements, plans, and influential contacts. Every word was carefully chosen to reinforce the image she wished to maintain. The simple man, on the other hand, remained attentive. He observed the details that few noticed. He knew how to recognize when an environment changes its tone, when the superficial gives way to the essential. At one point, their eyes met. She held his gaze for a brief second, filled with superiority. He responded with a slight nod, respectful, without any intention beyond cordiality. That irritated her. In her mind, that gesture didn't match someone she had placed so low. How did someone so simple dare to direct any kind of recognition toward her? It was then that she solidified her judgment. She decided internally that this man didn't deserve her attention, her time, or her consideration. What she didn't know was that his silence was not a sign of submission. It was control. It was awareness. It was the posture of someone who understands their own place without needing to announce it. Some men learn to wait. They learned that time reveals what words cannot sustain, and while that woman believed she was in control of the situation, the truth advanced slowly, preparing the exact moment to reveal itself. That woman didn't immediately notice the moment the environment began to reorganize. There was no announcement, no formal call. It was something subtle, almost imperceptible to someone too distracted trying to show off. Conversations lowered in volume. Laughter ended mid-sentence. People who previously spoke with confidence now fell silent, adjusting their posture as if something more important were about to happen. She found it strange. She looked around, trying to understand the reason for that sudden change. Her first impulse was to think that someone more relevant had arrived. Perhaps a prominent figure, someone famous, someone who justified that sudden attention. Then, without haste, the simple man stood up. There was no fuss, no exaggerated gesture, just the discreet sound of the chair being pushed back. Still, it was enough to attract attentive gazes. The woman felt a slight discomfort. It didn't make sense. Why did that man, so common in her eyes, seem to cause silence just by moving? He walked a few steps forward calmly. His countenance remained the same, serene, firm, secure. There was no nervousness, no anxiety. It was the behavior of someone who knows exactly where they stand. Some people nodded in respect. Others waited in absolute silence. The environment, which previously revolved around appearances, now surrendered to presence. The woman felt her stomach tighten. That wasn't the place she had reserved for him in her judgments. That wasn't the position that, in her mind, someone so simple should occupy. But reality didn't ask permission to impose itself. And for the first time that night, she realized she might have misjudged everything. When the simple man began to speak, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word came out in the exact tone to be heard by everyone. Silence was already guaranteed. He spoke with clarity, with quiet authority. He didn't use grand terms or catchy phrases. Still, everything he said carried weight, decision, purpose. The woman felt her face heat up. Little by little, she began to understand. That man wasn't an ordinary guest. He wasn't there by chance. He didn't participate in the conversations because he didn't need to compete for space. He was the real center of that meeting. As he spoke, some people took notes. Others nodded in agreement. No one interrupted. No one questioned. The respect was evident and long-standing. Every sentence dismantled the image she had created. The simple man didn't need to display achievements. He was the origin of them. He didn't need to impress. He was the one who defined directions, decisions, and consequences. The woman remembered, with painful precision, the moment she ignored him, the quick glance, the rushed conclusion, the silent contempt. Now it all made sense. Simplicity wasn't a lack. It was a choice. It was control. It was maturity. While she had built her presence in minutes, he had built his position over years, away from curious eyes, away from easy validation. And in that instant, without anyone having to say a thing, the woman felt something rare. Shame. When the simple man finished speaking, the room remained silent for a few seconds. Not out of doubt, but out of respect. It was the kind of pause that confirms authority, not questions it. The woman remained motionless. Everything she had done that night flashed through her mind. Every calculated gesture, every strategic smile, every judgment made with no basis other than appearance. She realized that while she tried to place herself above others, she had revealed herself to be small. No one exposed her. No one pointed at her. No one needed to remind her of the mistake. The humiliation was silent, internal, inevitable. She tried to reorganize her posture, as if that could erase the recent past. She tried to convince herself she could still regain control of the situation. But something had changed permanently. The simple man didn't look at her again, not out of contempt, but out of genuine indifference. To him, that chapter was already closed, and that hurt more than any direct confrontation. Being ignored now, after understanding who he was, carried a different weight. It wasn't revenge. It was a consequence. The woman finally understood that she hadn't been judged by him. She had been judged by herself. And some truths, when they arrive too late, leave no room for repair, only for learning. That woman remained for a few minutes observing the movement around her, trying to decide what to do. Part of her wanted to leave immediately, to disappear before anyone noticed the embarrassment she carried in her eyes. Another part insisted there was still a chance to reposition herself. She took a deep breath and walked toward the simple man. Each step felt heavier than it should. Now she paid attention to details she had previously ignored. The firm posture, the attentive gaze, the way other people naturally made room for him to pass. When she approached, she tried a restrained smile. I didn't know you were—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The simple man raised his hand calmly, interrupting her without rudeness. His gesture carried neither anger nor pleasure in embarrassing her. It simply ended something that didn't need to continue. "It's not about knowing who I am," he said calmly. "It's about how you choose to see people." Those words hit harder than any direct accusation. She tried to respond, to explain herself, to justify her behavior, but she realized at that moment that no explanation would sound honest. It hadn't been a misunderstanding. It had been a choice. He walked away shortly after, without prolonging the moment. He wasn't seeking recognition or excuses. To him, the conversation no longer had value. And there, alone in the middle of so many people, the woman felt something she had never experienced that way, the clear awareness that she had lost an opportunity that wouldn't return. The rest of the night passed strangely for that woman. Conversations continued, people circulated, commitments moved forward. But nothing seemed the same. She no longer spoke with the same confidence. She no longer laughed with the same ease. She was physically present but distant inside. The simple man didn't cross her path again, and that absence began to weigh more than any confrontation ever could. He didn't need to reaffirm anything. The simple fact of moving on, indifferent, was enough to reinforce the lesson. The woman began to observe the environment through different eyes. She noticed how many people spoke much and achieved little, how many depended on attention to feel relevant, how many confused visibility with importance. And inevitably she noticed herself. She understood that she had become an expert at judging quickly, at classifying people without knowing them, at deciding value based on superficial signs. The silence of the simple man began to echo within her, not as disapproval, but as a mirror. She understood that no one had been unfair to her that night. No one exposed her. No one humiliated her publicly. She had done it all by herself. And some lessons are like that. They don't scream, they don't hurt immediately, but they remain, insistent, until they are finally accepted. Days later, the scene still returned to that woman's mind. It didn't matter how much she tried to distract herself or convince herself that it hadn't been that important. The episode remained alive. She remembered the exact moment she ignored the simple man, the silent judgment, the mistaken certainty, and mainly the naturalness with which he occupied the space that was always his. She realized it wasn't his title or his position that caused an impact. It was his posture, the peace of someone who doesn't need to diminish anyone to assert who they are. The woman began to notice similar situations around her, people who were underestimated, others who were overvalued just because they knew how to promote themselves better. And gradually she understood that the world doesn't work in the simple way she believed. That real value rarely announces itself. It reveals itself. The simple man never knew how much that experience marked her life, and perhaps he never would. But that no longer mattered. The lesson didn't need witnesses. She began to understand that hasty judgment doesn't reveal who is being judged. It reveals the one who judges. And that truth began to accompany her silently, like a shadow that cannot be ignored. That woman entered that environment believing she could identify important people with just a look. She left understanding that appearance is too fragile a criterion to define value. She despised a simple man without knowing who he was. But the bigger mistake wasn't failing to recognize him. It was believing she had the right to measure someone without knowing them. The simple man followed his life exactly as before, without carrying grudges, without seeking validation, without needing to prove anything to anyone. She, on the other hand, went on differently, not because she was publicly humiliated, but because she was internally confronted. She learned that respect is not offered only to those who seem to deserve it. It is offered because it reveals character. She learned that some people carry great stories hidden under a common appearance. And above all, she learned that silent contempt usually returns in the same way, without noise, without warning, without a chance for correction. Some doors close not out of revenge, but as a consequence, and some lessons only become clear when there is no longer an opportunity to go back. She never forgot that night, not because of the simple man, but because of the person she discovered she was at that moment. Because in the end, the story was never about who he was. It was always about who she chose to be. Perhaps this story isn't just about that woman. Perhaps it's about all of us. At some point in life, we have all judged someone too quickly, by the way they dress, by their silence, by their simple appearance. And we forget that some people carry deep stories, built away from the spotlight, far from the need for approval. True value doesn't scream. It doesn't show off. It doesn't ask for attention. It remains in silence until the right moment to reveal itself. May this story serve as a reminder. Respect before judging. Observe before concluding. Because you never know who someone truly is. If this message made sense to you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Like the video so more people can reflect on this, and share it with someone who needs to hear this lesson today. Sometimes a simple video can change the way we see the world and the people around us.